Hey guys, welcome. Here's your first video review, and no laughing, only positive comments. Again, I'm going to go through this problem by problem, and I'm going to have to break it up into chunks because videos can only be about 15 minutes. And when I post this, you'll see the different parts. So here we go, starting with number one. Because I am dividing, I will end up multiplying by the reciprocal. And so what I'm going to do is break up my numerator and denominators by factoring. So I'm going to start with my first fraction right here, and I'm going to factor my numerator. So x squared minus 9 becomes x plus 3 and x minus 3. With the denominator, it already is factored, so I'll just bring it along. And now when I go to my other fraction, I am going to go ahead and, as I factor, flip the numerator and the denominator. So my new numerator will be 5, and then x plus 2, x minus 2. That's the factor of x squared minus 4. And then my new denominator will just be x minus 3. And now I'm going to look to see what I can simplify, or as we like to say, cancel from top to bottom. So I see my x plus 2's, and I see some x minus 3's. And when I'm done for my final answer, if you want to leave it broken up as x plus 3 and x minus 2, and then everything over 5, you are more than welcome to do that. If you want to go ahead and multiply or FOIL your numerator, you can also do that as well. So if you want to FOIL this, then our answer would change. It would look as x squared plus x plus negative 6 and then over 5. So whichever prefer as your final answer is up to you. Okay? All right, I'm actually going to jump to number 3 next. For number 3, I'm going to factor. So starting with my numerator, or my first fraction, I should say. In the numerator, I can factor out an x. And in the denominator, I can actually factor out a 4x. And you can see what I'm left with. When I go to the other fraction, what I'm going to do is to realize that this is actually, these both have perfect square roots. And so this just becomes a difference of squares. So I'm going to factor it as 2x plus 4 and 2x minus 4. And then what I'm going to notice is that in both of these I can take a 2 out. And now I'm going to look to simplify. And that definitely wasn't the easiest way to go through the problem, but if you saw a faster way, great. So I'm going to take out the x minus 2's, and I'm going to take a 2 out. So this 4 is going to turn into a 2. And then I can take these 2 out, and then I can take these x's out. So a lot comes out of this problem. When I look at what is left, I'm left with the x minus 3 and the x plus 2, and everything's in the numerator. And again, if you want to leave it separate as x minus 3 and x plus 2, you can do that. If you want to FOIL it, then you can also do that. So if you FOIL your answer, you're going to get x squared minus x plus negative 6. Either answer will be acceptable on the test. All right, moving on to problem 2. I'm going to factor my numerator because I'm just told to simplify, and that will become n plus 5 and n plus 3. In my denominator, I can factor that into n plus 5 and n minus 5. It's a difference of squares. And now between the two, I can take out the entire pieces of multiplication, n plus 5 and n plus 5. And so what I'm left with now is n plus 3 over n minus 5. And there's my final answer for this one. All right, number 4 changes because now I'm adding. And what I need to remember in adding, subtracting fractions is that I need a common denominator. This whole denominator is x plus 7. The other one is x minus 7. So what I need to do is to get the common denominator. So I'm just going to take the fractions times each other's denominators. So fraction number 1 is going to be multiplied by x minus 7, top and bottom. And the other fraction is going to be multiplied by x plus 7. So as I go through, the entire denominator is just going to be x plus 7 and x minus 7. Now, when I go through the numerator, from my first fraction, I just have x minus 7. From the second fraction, the 4 is going to be multiplied to the x and to the 7. So when I multiply that, I get 4x plus 28. And when I look at my new numerator, I can see that I can actually do some simplifying. I can combine my x's into 5x, and then I can combine my constants into 21. So I'm going to go ahead and just erase my old numerator now and replace it with those two. And there's my final answer. And again, for the denominator, if you want to multiply that out, you're more than welcome to. In this problem, I'm actually just going to leave it as is. All right, moving on to problem 5. I'm dividing. And again, when I divide, I want to remember that I'm multiplying by the reciprocal. My first fraction is not going to change. I won't do the reciprocal here. I'm just going to go ahead and factor. So the numerator can factor into x plus 4 and x plus 6. And the denominator can factor into x plus 4 and then x minus 4. When I go to my second fraction, now what I'm going to do is just multiply by the reciprocal. There's no factoring. So x minus 6 goes on top, x plus 6 goes on the bottom. And when I look to see what I can simplify or cancel out, my x plus 4s can go, my x plus 6s can go, and then I'm just left with the x minus 6 for my numerator and x minus 4 for my denominator. And now I have my final answer. And that's all you can do. So number 5's done. All right, number 6, another addition. We love these ones, right? When I look at number 6, I already noticed that they both have the denominator of x minus 2. So the only thing that has to happen is that in my second fraction, I have to build that up with an x squared. So I'm going to take the second fraction times an x squared on the top and on the bottom. And as far as the denominator goes, it just becomes the x squared over x minus 2. And as far as the numerator goes, the 5 from the first fraction goes down. And on the second fraction, the x and the x squared will be x cubed. And again, if you want to distribute your x squared into your denominator and turn it into x cubed minus 2x instead, you can do that. But if you don't, that's okay. All right, let's move to number 7. All right, with number 7, I'm going to break this into a numerator part, and then I'm going to work on the denominator, and then I'll bring the two together into one problem. So focusing on the numerator, what I'm going to notice is that the 4 doesn't have a denominator, so I'm going to put it over 1. And I'm going to work to get their common denominator, which is going to be x. So I'm going to take the second fraction times x. And then my numerator can just become 2 plus 4x over x. And I'll come back to that later. When I go to the denominator and I look at the 2x plus 1 over 5x squared, this already is just one fraction. So that saves me a lot of time. So now I'm going to take the new numerator and I'm going to divide it by the new denominator, or actually the old denominator. But when I do that, I'm going to remember that I'm just multiplying by the reciprocal. So here's my numerator. And now I'm going to multiply it by the denominator's reciprocal. And now I am ready to factor. So looking at the numerator here, I can take a 2 out, so I'm going to do that real quick. And when I take the 2 out, excuse me, pardon me, when I take the 2 out, I'm going to be left with 1 plus 2x. And then I can simplify that 1 plus 2x with the 2x plus 1. Same thing, just written in a different order. And then with my 5x squared and the x, I can take an x out. So when I look at my final answer and what I'm left with, in the numerator, I have the 2, and I have the 5x, which I'm just going to put as 10x. And then there's nothing left in the denominator. This is it. 10x is your final answer for number 7. All right, number 8 is going to be the last problem for this section. I'm going to look at the first fraction, and in my first fraction, it is already simplified, or not simplified, but the denominator is already broken to parts. Same with the second fraction. In my third fraction, I'm going to factor the denominator, and when I factor it, I'm going to make it x plus 5 and x minus 1. So when I compare the three denominators, what I'm going to notice is that they already all have x minus 1 in common. So what needs to be added? Well, in the first fraction, I have a 5x. So that 5x is going to have to be shared to this fraction and to this fraction. Then the next thing that I notice is that this, in my third fraction, there's an x plus 5. So I'm going to have to share that with this fraction, my first fraction, and also with this fraction. So now I'm just going to kind of take this one fraction at a time. So in the end, I'm just going to start with the numerators and then finish my denominator off at the very end. So in my numerators here, what I'm going to have to do is with the x minus 2, that x minus 2 is going to have to be now be multiplied by the x plus 5. All right, so my first fraction's new numerator is, I'm going to go ahead and multiply this out, x squared, and then I'll get 3x, and then I'll get negative 10. So there's my first fraction. All right, next I'm going to take my second fraction. I'm actually going to circle this so I remember it's part of my fraction. And in my second fraction, I'm going to take the numerator of 1, and I realize I have to take that times 5x, which actually will just be 5x, and then I have to take that times the x plus 5. So when I work on the numerator for my second fraction, it'll just be 5x squared plus 25x. So I'm going to circle that because I'll come back to that one later. And now when I go back up to my third fraction, the first thing I'm going to work with is this minus sign, and I'm going to add the opposite, make it negative 3x plus negative 2. And the only thing I have to multiply this fraction by is the 5x because it has mostly everything. So here's the 5x that I have to multiply, and now here comes the negative 3x plus the negative 2. So multiplying that, I'm going to move this down a little bit, I'll get negative 15x squared plus negative 10x. Now all three parts that are circled here, I'm going to highlight them for you, are going to be all combined together. So that's going to be my next step. All right, so see this line? I'm going to fill in this line. So I'm going to start by adding my like terms. I'm going to take the x squared and the 5x squared and get 6x squared. And then I'm going to add negative 15x squared and get negative 9x squared. All right, now what I'm going to do is take all my plain x's. So I have 25x and negative 10x, which gives me 15x. Add the 3x, and now I'm at 18x. And when I look at the constants, I only have one constant. It's the negative 10 that I'm underlining. And then what's my denominator? You know, after all that work, I'm just going to put the bare minimum denominator. It's going to be 5x, x plus 5, and x minus 1. And that's good enough. There's my final answer for number 8. And that's it. So that's the first part of 1 through 8. Pick up for the next part.